The sprawling mansion in the outskirts of New York stood tall under the faint glow of the evening sun, its white pillars gleaming like a beacon of wealth and success. To an outsider, it was a symbol of the Amin family's power, a palace built on decades of hard work and fortune. But to Alexa Amin, it was more a prison than a home, a gilded cage. She had grown accustomed to the grandeur that surrounded her, but the golden walls were no more than a reminder of everything she had lost. Alexa, a striking young woman of Nigerian descent, had inherited her mother's rich, dark skin, her father's high cheekbones, and a quiet dignity that came from within. Her black hair, long and lush, cascaded down her back in soft waves, a stark contrast against the stark, polished floors of the mansion that she scrubbed every day. Even though she was beautiful, she often hid herself in modest, simple clothes, preferring to be invisible. Her beauty was more of a curse than a blessing in a home where her worth was measured by how well she could serve others. Every day, Alexa awoke before the sun's first light, long before her father, Amin Armstrong, or his new wife, Zina, ever stirred. She was up, cleaning the vast hallways, polishing the grand staircase that wound like a snake through the center of the mansion. The house was eerily quiet at this hour, save for the sound of her footsteps echoing on the marble floors, a constant reminder that she was alone in this house. Alone with the ghosts of better times. Her mother, Jen Amin, had once been the proud wife of Amin Armstrong, a businessman whose wealth made him one of the most powerful men in New York. Together, they had been a force to be reckoned with. But that was before Zina entered their lives. Zina had been nothing more than a dancer at a club when she had met Amin, seductive, charming, and manipulative. She had worked her way into his heart with the ease of a skilled performer, twisting his emotions with every smile, every soft word. And one fateful night, in the heat of their passion, Zina had become pregnant with a girl who would later be named Hannah. That was the turning point for Alexa's life. Alexa could still remember the day her father had come home with Zina and Hannah. It was as if a thunderstorm had entered their home, throwing everything into disarray. Her father, once kind and attentive, had become a shell of the man he once was. Under Zina's control, he turned his back on his own family. Jen was exiled to the wings of the mansion, her health deteriorating with every passing year. Alexa, once destined for greatness, was left to clean the house that had once been hers. She had tried to rebel, to fight back, but it was no use. Zina's influence was too strong, and Alexa found herself gradually shrinking into the background, a silent observer to the shifting dynamics of her family. Zina's grip on the household was ironclad, and soon, Alexa had found herself relegated to the role of maid, cleaning up after everyone in the home, while her father remained blissfully oblivious to the pain his actions had caused. Hannah, the child of Zina and Amin, was nothing like Alexa. While Alexa was reserved and composed, Hannah was loud, impulsive, and demanding. She knew no boundaries, no respect for others, and had the same manipulative streak that ran through her mother. Hannah had been raised in a world where everything came easy, money, attention, admiration, but it wasn't enough for her. She was always seeking something more, always trying to prove her worth in a way that was both destructive and hollow. Alexa's relationship with Hannah was complicated, to say the least. Hannah never seemed to understand the difference between her own world and Alexa's. She assumed that because she was the biological daughter of Amin and Zina, she was the rightful heir to everything the family had. She flaunted her privilege, never realizing how much it hurt Alexa. In moments of rare reflection, Alexa would wonder how things had gone so wrong. How had she, the daughter of the man who built this mansion, ended up as a maid in her own home? Her thoughts were often interrupted by the sound of Zina's voice. "Alexa," Zina called from the hallway one morning. "Stop daydreaming and get back to work. This house won't clean itself." Alexa stood up straight, wiping her hands on the apron she had tied around her waist. Her heart tightened, but she said nothing. She was used to it. "Yes, ma'am," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She had learned early on to stay out of Zina's way, to remain unseen and unheard. The more invisible she was, the less chance Xena had of directing her ire towards her. But despite everything, Alexa held on to a flicker of hope. There was a dream deep within her heart, one that she clung to with everything she had. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, of healing people, and most importantly, of freeing herself from this life. Every evening, after completing her chores, Alexa would retreat to the small room she had been assigned. There, in the dim light, she would pore over her textbooks, trying to absorb as much knowledge as she could. She knew it was her only escape. If she could finish her degree, she could leave this life behind. If only things were different. But Alexa knew that her future was tied to this mansion, to her father's choices. Her chances of escaping were slim. In the meantime, she continued to live each day in silence, a prisoner in her own home, her dreams suspended by the weight of her family's dysfunction. The sun had barely risen when Alexa was already deep into her chores. She was scrubbing the marble floors of the dining room when she heard the unmistakable sound of high heels clicking against the floor. It was Xena. Alexa's body tensed in anticipation. She knew what was coming. "Alexa, I need you to clean the guest suite today," Xena said in her usual high-pitched voice. There was no greeting, no pleasantries, just orders. Xena had always treated her like she was beneath her, a mere servant to do her bidding. "Of course, ma'am," Alexa responded, keeping her eyes lowered. As Xena passed, she paused for a moment, her sharp eyes glinting with something that could only be described as satisfaction. "Don't think for a second that your little dream of becoming a doctor will ever come true. You're wasting your time. You'll always be a maid in this house." Alexa clenched her fists, but she remained silent. It was pointless to argue with Xena. She had heard it all before. Xena was the kind of woman who always got what she wanted. She had wormed her way into Amin's heart with her charm and beauty, and now she controlled the household with an iron fist. She kept a close eye on everything, from the household staff to the way her daughter, Hannah, behaved. She was a woman who played the game of manipulation and power with the precision of a chess master. Alexa was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floors of the massive dining hall when she heard the unmistakable click of high heels approaching from behind. It was a sound she had come to dread, a sharp reminder of the woman who had turned her world upside down. Xena. Her stepmother. The woman who had once been a stranger but now ruled over Alexa's life as though she were nothing more than a mere shadow. Xena's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and cold, even though she smiled when she spoke. "Alexa," Xena said, her voice laced with condescension, "I need you to clean the guest suite today. Make sure it's spotless. The Hamiltons will be arriving soon, and I don't want them to think we don't know how to keep our house in order." Alexa stood up slowly, trying to mask the anger that simmered inside her. She wiped her hands on her apron, and without meeting Xena's gaze, she answered quietly, "Yes, ma'am." Xena didn't leave right away. Instead, she paused, taking a step closer, her perfume overpowering in the air. Alexa could feel Xena's eyes on her, studying her with the same calculating look she had seen countless times before. There was something about Xena that unsettled her, a quiet malice that hid beneath her polished exterior. "You know," Xena began, her voice almost too sweet, "you might want to focus more on your role here. I know you have these silly little dreams of becoming a doctor, but let's be realistic, shall we? You'll never make it out of this house, Alexa. This place is your world now. You'll always be a maid. You'll never be good enough for anything else." The word stung. Alexa wanted to snap, to argue, to fight back, but she had learned the hard way that it was useless. Every attempt she had made to stand up to Xena had ended in failure, and worse, in more chores and humiliation. Xena knew how to break people down, how to twist their insecurities into something that felt like truth. Alexa forced herself to smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll clean the guest suite." "Right away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Xena's lips curved into a thin smile as she turned to leave. Good girl. And don't forget, we have guests coming, so be on your best behavior. We wouldn't want anyone to think you're a liability, would we? The words hung in the air like smoke. Alexa's fingers curled into fists at her sides, but she kept her face impassive. She had learned that showing any sign of weakness only encouraged Xena further. As Xena disappeared down the hall, Alexa stood frozen for a moment, trying to regain her composure. It felt like the walls of the mansion were closing in on her, suffocating her with their luxury and wealth. She had once thought that being rich and powerful meant freedom, but now she saw it only as a chain that bound her to a life of servitude, trapped in the grip of people who didn't care for her or her dreams. With a sigh, Alexa turned and began walking towards the guest suite. She could already hear the sounds of the Hamiltons preparing to arrive, their voices carrying through the corridors. The Hamiltons were one of the wealthiest families in New York, their names synonymous with power and influence. The prospect of a marriage between their family and the Amin family had been discussed for months. But Alexa knew, deep down, that she wasn't the one the Hamiltons were interested in. It was Hannah. Hannah, the daughter of Xena and Amin, was everything Alexa wasn't: loud, outgoing, and carefree. Where Alexa was reserved and humble, Hannah was brash and self-centered. But Hannah had one thing Alexa didn't: privilege. Hannah had been raised in a world where she was always the center of attention, always given the best of everything, and she was determined to keep it that way. As Alexa entered the guest suite, she couldn't help but think of Hannah's upcoming engagement to Alexander Hamilton. It had been decided long ago, a marriage arranged by their parents, cementing the ties between two powerful families. But there was something Alexa couldn't ignore, a quiet unease that gnawed at her every time she saw Hannah and Alexander together. It wasn't just jealousy, it was a sense of foreboding, a feeling that something wasn't right. The Hamilton family had always been picky about who they married. They had a strict tradition of only marrying pure women, those who had not been tainted by promiscuity or scandal. Hannah, for all her beauty and wealth, was far from pure. Her past was littered with boyfriends, fleeting romances, and rumors that her mother had once been a stripper. The Hamiltons wouldn't accept that. And so, a plan had been hatched. One that involved Alexa in ways she hadn't expected. Alexa's thoughts were interrupted as she began to dust the shelves in the guest suite, her movements automatic, like the routine she had followed for years. It was hard to focus on anything else when the world around her felt like it was slowly crumbling. The night had arrived, and with it, the Hamiltons. The grand dining hall was filled with the soft murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses, and the elegance of New York's elite. Alexander Hamilton, the heir to the Hamilton fortune, stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders and striking features making him stand out from the crowd. He was every bit the epitome of a powerful man, handsome, confident, and unattainable. Alexa caught a glimpse of him from across the room, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. She quickly looked away, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. It was foolish, she knew, to entertain thoughts of him. He wasn't here for her. He wasn't here for anyone but Hannah. But despite herself, Alexa couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The tension in the air was palpable, and she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. What did this proposal mean for her family? For her. She had never expected to be caught in the web of family politics, but it seemed the day had finally come. There was no escaping the future that was unfolding, no way to avoid the changes that were about to rip through the fabric of her life. And as the evening wore on, Alexa couldn't shake the feeling that the truth of everything that had happened, and everything that was yet to come, was just around the corner, waiting to be uncovered. The soft hum of voices filled the air as the evening continued, but Alexa couldn't shake the tension that clung to the room. The guests had gathered, each one a picture of wealth and refinement. The Hamiltons, New York's wealthiest family, had arrived, bringing with them an aura of power and importance that dominated the room. Among them stood Alexander Hamilton, who had drawn the gaze of every woman in the room, and, to Alexa's quiet dismay, even her own. It wasn't just the way he looked, tall, dark, and impeccably dressed, but there was something about him. Something beyond his physical appearance. His eyes, sharp and calculating, seemed to see everything, and his presence commanded attention without even trying. Yet, for all his allure, it was clear that his attention was focused elsewhere. His gaze was fixed firmly on Hannah, who was laughing brightly in the center of the room, surrounded by friends, oblivious to Alexa's quiet presence at the edge of the party. Alexa knew the plan. She had always known it. The marriage proposal from the Hamiltons was an arrangement, a business deal to unite two powerful families. But for the first time, as she observed Alexander from across the room, she began to wonder about the sincerity behind it all. Was he truly interested in Hannah, or was he merely following the script that had been laid out for him? Hannah, with her playful charm, had always been the favored daughter in this house. She was everything Alexa was not, bold, unbothered, and brimming with confidence. As the night wore on, it became clear that Hannah was the center of attention, her infectious laugh and flirty gestures making her the star of the evening. The Hamiltons, eager to secure the marriage deal, fawned over Hannah, praising her beauty and charm, completely unaware of the undercurrent of tension that ran through the air. But Alexa wasn't concerned with the compliments or the focus that Hannah was receiving. She had her own thoughts, her own quiet rebellion that simmered just beneath the surface. She had no illusions about her place in the world. She was a servant in her own home, reduced to the status of a maid, working endlessly to appease the whims of others. But tonight felt different. There was something in the air, something that whispered of change. The tension began to mount when Zina, her stepmother, approached Alexa with her usual air of superiority. Zina's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she surveyed the scene. "Alexa," Zina said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, "you look so lost in thought. Shouldn't you be tending to your duties instead of daydreaming?" Her eyes flicked toward Alexander, who was still deep in conversation with Hannah and her friends. Alexa met her gaze, her face impassive. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'll get back to work." Zina's lips curled into a sly smile. "You should. After all, you're the one who's been made to play maid in your own home. It must be frustrating to watch the world pass you by while your sister gets everything handed to her." The words hit their mark, but Alexa didn't flinch. She had heard them all before. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am," she replied, her tone flat. Zina stepped closer, her presence looming over Alexa. "I'm sure you are," she said, her voice lowering. "But you must be careful. The Hamiltons are a powerful family. If you want to stay on their good side, you'd better learn your place." Alexa's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let her stepmother see how deeply the words cut. She simply nodded, retreating into the background as Zina returned to the mingling guests. But as she moved away, her mind was racing. The plan, the scheme that had been set in motion, was starting to feel too real. She had always thought that her place in this house was fixed, that she would remain invisible, working in the shadows while her family basked in luxury. But now, something inside her was awakening, an ember of rebellion, a desire for something more. She couldn't keep living like this. As the evening wore on, Alexa found herself standing by the grand windows, staring out at the vast estate. The night air was cool, and the faint sounds of laughter and music filtered in from the gathering behind her. She could feel the weight of the decisions that lay ahead pressing on her chest. There was no escaping the reality that was unfolding in front of her. Her thoughts were interrupted when a figure approached from behind. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. "I didn't think I'd find you standing here, alone," a familiar voice said. It was Alexander. He had stepped away from the crowd, and now stood beside her, his presence as commanding as ever. For a moment, Alexa didn't know how to respond. She had spent so many years avoiding interactions with him, keeping her distance, fearing the power that seemed to emanate from him. But tonight, things felt different. She could feel her heart racing as he stood beside her, his gaze sweeping over the sprawling grounds of the estate. "Is everything okay?" Alexander asked, his voice low and sincere. There was a genuine concern in his eyes that caught Alexa off guard. She hadn't expected him to notice her, let alone care about her well-being. "I'm fine," Alexa replied quickly, trying to hide the nervousness that crept up her spine. "Just thinking." He nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were trying to understand her. "You're not like the others," he remarked softly. "You're different." Alexa glanced at him, her heart pounding in her chest. His words caught her off guard, and for a brief moment, she felt something stir within her, a spark of curiosity, of something deeper than the facade they both wore. But before she could speak, the moment was broken. A loud voice called from behind them. "Alexander! Where did you disappear off to?" It was Hannah, of course. She was looking around the room, clearly searching for him. Alexander turned to face her, a forced smile playing on his lips. "I'm right here," he called, walking toward her. But as he left, Alexa couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. The way he had looked at her, the way his words had felt more than just polite conversation, it was as if, for a brief moment, she had been seen for who she really was. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to stir something deep inside Alexa. A feeling she had long suppressed. And for the first time in years, Alexa began to wonder if perhaps her life was about to change. But the question was she ready for it? The following days blurred into one another, the oppressive weight of Alexa's responsibilities pulling her further into the shadows of the mansion. Each morning, she awoke to the same routine, scrubbing the floors, dusting the furniture, and ensuring the house ran smoothly, all while hiding the turmoil she felt inside. It was as if her life had become nothing more than a series of motions, mundane, mechanical, and never her own. But something had shifted in Alexa. After the brief moment with Alexander Hamilton by the window, a quiet longing had taken root deep within her. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, the way his words had struck her with an intensity she hadn't expected. She had spent so many years in the background, ignored and unseen, but Alexander had seen her. He had seen her in a way no one else ever had. And for a brief moment, Alexa had felt important. She could no longer ignore the pull between them, the invisible thread that seemed to draw her toward him. Even though the reality of her place in the world, her role as a maid in her own father's house, had never been more evident, the thought of a different future, a future where she wasn't confined to the shadows, seemed possible for the first time. It terrified her. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the mansion grew more tense. The Hamiltons were due to return for the engagement announcement soon, and the air was thick with expectations. Zena had made it clear to everyone that Hannah's marriage to Alexander was a foregone conclusion. The guests, the arrangements, the extravagant decorations, everything had been planned, carefully orchestrated to ensure the deal was sealed. It was a political alliance, a way to strengthen both families' wealth and power. Nothing more. Except Alexa couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than what everyone wanted her to believe. Alexander wasn't just a wealthy man. He was perceptive, intelligent, and surprisingly kind. The way he had looked at her, really looked at her, made her question everything she had been told. Was it possible that, deep down, he wasn't just marrying Hannah because of his family's wishes? Was it possible that he was more than just a pawn in this carefully crafted game? A part of Alexa hated herself for even thinking about it. She had no place in his world. She was just the maid, the invisible daughter of a broken marriage. But another part of her, a part she had buried for so long, couldn't deny the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Alexander might feel something more than obligation toward her sister. She had seen the way he looked at Hannah, distant, detached. The only time he seemed genuinely present was when he had spoken to her, Alexa, that night by the window. But she couldn't let herself get lost in those thoughts. After all, nothing would come of them. The Hamiltons weren't interested in her. They were interested in her sister, Hannah, the perfect, pure daughter who had grown up with the privileges Alexa could only dream of. Alexa woke up early, the first rays of the morning sun filtering through her window, casting long shadows across the room. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of Alexander and the future that felt so far out of reach. As much as she tried to push him from her mind, he lingered there, like a haunting presence she couldn't escape. The mansion was alive with activity as preparations were made for the engagement announcement. Servants rushed around, setting up tables, arranging flowers, and ensuring that everything was perfect. It was a whirlwind of movement, but Alexa found herself caught in it all, lost in the background as usual. She moved silently through the halls, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might notice her. Her heart was heavy with the weight of everything she had learned, everything she had seen, and everything she had kept hidden from the world. But there was no avoiding the inevitable. The Hamiltons arrived shortly before noon, their presence as commanding as ever. Alexander, of course, was the center of attention, his tall, broad frame easily drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. His sharp features and confident demeanor made him seem almost otherworldly, as if he existed in a realm far above the rest of them. As he entered the room, his eyes immediately found Alexa's. For a moment, it was as if time stood still. The world around them faded, and Alexa felt a rush of emotions she had no name for: desire, confusion, hope. She quickly turned her head, afraid of what he might see in her expression, but it was too late. He had already seen her. There was no going back. Hannah, ever the star of the evening, stepped forward to greet him, her laughter ringing out like a bell. She was radiant, the epitome of beauty and confidence. But even as she wrapped her arms around Alexander in a show of affection, Alexa couldn't help but notice the way his gaze lingered on her. It wasn't the same as it had been with Hannah. There was something more in his eyes when he looked at Alexa, something softer, something more searching. Hannah, oblivious to the unspoken tension, continued to chatter away, her eyes never straying from Alexander's. She was the one everyone expected him to marry, the one everyone assumed he was destined to be with. But Alexa couldn't ignore the feeling that something was shifting, that the carefully constructed world around her was beginning to crack. As the day wore on, the engagement announcement was made with all the fanfare one would expect. Hannah and Alexander stood before their families, their hands clasped together, smiles on their faces. But Alexa couldn't shake the strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't jealousy, exactly, but something else, a quiet, unsettling sense that she was being pushed out of the life she had always known. And yet, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't forget the brief moments she had shared with Alexander. The way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her with such quiet sincerity. It was a fleeting moment, a brief connection that seemed to mean nothing in the grand scheme of things. But to Alexa, it meant everything. The engagement announcement was just the beginning. In the days that followed, everything around Alexa seemed to fall into place as if it were orchestrated by an unseen hand. The mansion, usually so grand and imposing, felt suffocating. It wasn't just the thick air of high society pressure, it was the weight of the plan that had been set into motion. The plan that Alexa had no choice but to follow, whether she wanted to or not. Hannah, for all her beauty and charm, was far from the pure, innocent woman the Hamiltons were looking for. Her past, littered with fleeting relationships and her mother's scandalous history, made her an unsuitable choice for a marriage with someone like Alexander. But Hannah, ever resourceful, had devised a plan, a dangerous, manipulative scheme that would ensure she was the one to marry Alexander, no matter the cost. And Alexa, caught in the middle, was the key to making it all happen. Hannah had always been the favored daughter in the eyes of her father and stepmother, Zena. She had the looks, the charm, and the cunning to get what she wanted. But she also knew her flaws, and she knew that the Hamiltons, being the purists they were, could never accept her for who she was. The only way out, the only way to secure the powerful alliance with the Hamilton family, was to replace herself with someone they could truly respect. Someone who embodied purity, innocence, and grace. Someone like Alexa. It started innocently enough, with Hannah pulling Alexa aside after a long day of preparations. They were in the private sitting room, the dim lighting casting shadows on their faces. Hannah leaned back on the plush chair, her fingers delicately brushing the edge of the fabric as she studied Alexa carefully. "Alexa," Hannah began, her voice deceptively sweet, "you know what's at stake, don't you?" Alexa looked up from her position near the window, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. She had an uneasy feeling that this conversation wasn't going to be like any of the others. I know," Alexa replied quietly, her eyes not meeting Hannah's. Her voice was steady, but she could feel a rising sense of dread in her stomach. Hannah's lips curled into a subtle, calculating smile. "I'm glad you understand. Because, you see, I have a plan, a way to ensure that everything works out the way it should." Alexa swallowed, a knot forming in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I've done everything I can to keep up appearances, to play the role they expect me to," Hannah said, her voice dropping to a low murmur, "but it's not enough. I've had my share of affairs, and we both know that the Hamiltons want purity. I can't give them that. But you can." Alexa froze. Her blood ran cold as Hannah's words sank in. "What do you mean, Hannah? What are you talking about?" "Think about it, Alexa," Hannah continued, her tone almost patronizing, as if she were speaking to a child. "You've always been the perfect daughter, the obedient one, the pure one. Alexander would never marry me, not after everything that's been said about my past. But you," she paused, letting the weight of her words settle between them, "you could be the one to take my place. I'll make sure you get what you need. We can make this work." Alexa's mind reeled as she tried to process what her sister was saying. She felt her stomach twist with horror. The idea was preposterous. She wasn't even supposed to be part of this world. She was the invisible maid in her father's house, a mere afterthought to the glamorous life that Hannah led. "You want me to pretend to be you?" Alexa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hannah leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a sense of purpose that unsettled Alexa. "Not just." Was there any other way? Could she refuse and still keep her dignity, her chance at a life beyond this mansion? But for now, all she could do was nod, defeated. "I'll think about it," she whispered, barely recognizing her own voice. The night had arrived, the night that would change everything for Alexa. The grand mansion was filled with opulence, the chandeliers shimmering with thousands of lights that reflected off the polished marble floors. The night was a celebration of the union between two of New York's most powerful families. The Hamiltons had come, their wealth and status towering over everything else. And tonight, they would leave with their prize, the pure, beautiful daughter of the Amin family. Or so they thought. Hannah was gone, slipping away quietly after the final pre-wedding arrangements. No one had noticed. The guests were too busy congratulating the families, preparing for the ceremony that was set to take place in just a few short hours. But Alexa knew what was expected of her. She knew what she was about to do, even though her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of it all threatening to suffocate her. Tonight, Hannah's plan would unfold. The engagement announcement had already taken place, with Alexander Hamilton standing proudly by Hannah's side, flashing his perfect smile for the cameras. But Alexa, hidden away in the shadows of the mansion, could feel her pulse quickening. This wasn't just a game anymore. This wasn't about wealth, power, or even family. This was about her. This was her moment to either break free or remain trapped in the suffocating web that had been spun around her. As she moved to the waiting car, Alexa's heart raced. She had prepared herself, physically and mentally, for the role she had to play. The fine dress she wore was fitted perfectly, the soft satin fabric brushing against her skin. Her hair, usually tied back in a simple bun, cascaded down in waves, framing her face in the most delicate way. She looked every bit like the woman the Hamiltons thought they were getting, Hannah, but in reality, she was someone entirely different. Someone who had been forced into this role, but someone who had made the choice to go along with it. When she stepped into the back of the sleek black limousine, the doors shut behind her with a soft click, and the vehicle began to drive toward the venue for the night's festivities. She could hear the muffled chatter of the staff, the occasional clink of champagne glasses, and the faint sound of music from the grand piano playing in the ballroom. It felt like a dream she had no control over, and yet she couldn't seem to wake up from it. The car slowed, and she could see the grand entrance of the Hamilton estate looming ahead, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. It felt surreal. This wasn't her life. This wasn't where she belonged. But tonight, she was going to have to pretend. She was going to have to play the part, just as Hannah had planned. When the car came to a stop, the doors opened, and she was escorted out by a member of the Hamilton family's staff. Her heart pounded harder now, each step toward the grand entrance feeling like an eternity. The sound of her heels echoed in the empty night air as she approached the towering doors. Inside, the Hamilton family was already gathered, waiting. Alexander Hamilton stood at the forefront, his tall, broad frame towering over the others. He was dressed in a black tuxedo, his hair neatly combed, his expression as stoic as ever. He looked every bit the part of the perfect groom, strong, confident, and in control. But the flicker in his eyes, the way they lingered on Alexa, betrayed a hint of something else. Something unsettling. When she stepped into the room, the entire room went silent. All eyes turned toward her, toward the woman they thought was Hannah. She could see the look of approval on the faces of the Hamilton family, the way their smiles stretched wider as they took in her beauty. But Alexa's heart wasn't in it. She wasn't here to be admired. She was here to play a role she had no choice but to accept. "Welcome, my dear," one of the Hamilton family matriarchs said, a woman with silver hair and a cold smile. "We're so pleased to have you here tonight." Alexa nodded, her throat dry. She could barely speak, the words caught in her chest. Everything felt surreal. It was a dream she wanted to wake up from, but the dream wouldn't release its grip on her. Then Alexander stepped forward, his eyes locking with hers. There was no smile on his face, but there was something else, something that made Alexa's pulse spike. For a brief moment, he seemed to study her in a way that made her feel exposed. But she held her composure, standing tall as he took her hand and led her toward the waiting room. The night proceeded, each moment feeling like it was happening in slow motion. The Hamiltons treated her with the utmost respect, unaware that the woman they were fawning over wasn't their intended bride. Alexander seemed more and more distant with every passing moment, though. His gaze would occasionally flicker to her, but when their eyes met, there was a question in them, one that Alexa couldn't answer. The clock struck midnight, and it was time for the final part of the evening to begin. The wedding night. Alexa was escorted into a lavish room, decorated with gold accents and soft lighting that created an almost ethereal atmosphere. The bed, draped in satin sheets, looked so inviting. But Alexa's stomach churned as she took in the room, her thoughts a chaotic swirl. As the staff left the room, closing the door behind them, Alexa was left alone. She could hear the soft rustling of footsteps approaching. A moment later, Alexander entered the room, his eyes narrowed slightly. There was something in the air now, something she hadn't noticed before, a tension that hadn't existed before. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Alexa nodded. "Yes." He stepped closer, his gaze lingering on her for just a moment longer than was necessary. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the question that hovered between them. He could tell something was off. His sharp instincts, honed from years of business dealings, had detected it. "You're not who I thought you were," Alexander said suddenly, his voice almost a whisper. Alexa froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had known this moment would come. She had known that, despite the careful planning, despite the disguise, Alexander might realize something wasn't quite right. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, her heart pounding in her chest. "I can't explain it," he continued, stepping closer. "There's something about you. Something that doesn't match. Your eyes, your mannerisms, they're different. It's like, you're not who they think you are." Alexa's mind raced, her thoughts a blur. She had to keep up the charade. She had to keep playing the role that had been thrust upon her. But the reality of the situation was undeniable. "I am Hannah," Alexa said, forcing the words from her mouth, even as her heart screamed in protest. Alexander didn't look convinced. His gaze lingered on her for a few more seconds before he seemed to accept her words, though a flicker of doubt remained in his eyes. "Maybe," he murmured. "But something's not right. I'll figure it out soon enough." Alexa's blood ran cold as she realized that, despite her best efforts to play the part, she might not be able to keep up the charade for long. Alexander was too perceptive. Too sharp. And the night was far from over. The night had felt like an eternity, yet it passed in a blur. Alexa lay awake on the grand bed in the Hamilton mansion, staring at the ceiling as the soft moonlight filtered through the curtains. Her heart was racing, still unsettled from the night's events. The conversations with Alexander, the lingering glances, and the undeniable suspicion in his eyes. She could still feel the weight of his gaze, the way he had seemed to question her every word, every movement. Was it possible he knew? Could he really sense that something wasn't right? She couldn't afford to think about it now. She had to leave. The night had ended, and while she had done what she had been forced to do, there was no going back. As much as she tried to bury it in the recesses of her mind, the truth was undeniable: she had crossed a line. She wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified, but she needed to go home, back to the mansion where the life she knew awaited her, a life filled with cleaning, duties, and a suffocating sense of entrapment. The drive back was long, silent, and uneventful. The world outside the car window passed by in a blur of lights and shadows. Alexa sat still, her hands folded in her lap, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but she couldn't let herself rest yet. Not until she was sure the night was over. When the car pulled up to the Amin mansion, Alexa hurried inside, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She had to do something to protect herself. The night had been one step too far, and she wasn't sure how to handle what had just happened. She felt sick to her stomach, a constant knot of anxiety twisting inside her as she raced upstairs to her room. Locking the door behind her, she went straight to the small drawer where she kept the contraceptive pills. She had to make sure nothing happened, nothing that would tie her to the night, nothing that would leave a permanent mark on her life. She quickly popped the pill in her mouth, swallowing it with a glass of water. It was the only way to ensure that she could leave the night behind without any lasting consequences. But as the minutes passed, a feeling of nausea began to creep over her. It wasn't unusual for her to feel queasy after a stressful situation, but this was different. It came quickly and violently, and before she could stop herself, she rushed to the bathroom, throwing up the contents of her stomach. Her hands trembled as she wiped her mouth, staring at the reflection in the mirror. She felt like she was spiraling, like everything was slipping away from her. The pills. Had they worked? Were they still in her system? It didn't make sense. She couldn't afford for things to go wrong. She couldn't afford for anything to complicate her life any more than it already had. But as she looked into the mirror, there was a deep unease growing inside her. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Not now. The sound of footsteps outside her door brought her back to reality. Her heart skipped a beat as the door burst open, and there stood Hannah, her face twisted into a smug expression. Behind her was Jen, her stepmother, looking concerned but determined. "So, this is how it's going to be, huh?" Hannah's voice was low, dripping with venom. You think you can just walk in here, play your part, and go back to your pitiful little life like nothing happened? Alexa's breath hitched. Hannah, please. I didn't do anything wrong. I just followed the plan. You told me what to do. Hannah stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She looked Alexa up and down, her lips curling into a malicious smile. Oh, you did follow the plan, all right. But now, we need to talk about what comes next. Her eyes narrowed. I'm not blind, Alexa. I know exactly what you did last night. And you'd better keep your mouth shut about it. Alexa's chest tightened. What do you mean? Hannah's gaze turned icy, her tone lowering. You're not going to tell Alexander what happened, are you? You're not going to tell him that it was you who spent the night with him. If you do, I'll make sure you regret it. Don't think for a second that I'm going to let you ruin everything I've worked for. I'll make sure you and your mother never get out of here, Alexa. I'll make sure you stay nothing more than a maid for the rest of your life. Alexa's hands shook as the weight of Hannah's words crashed down on her. This was her sister, the one person she had always trusted, now threatening her with the very thing she had tried so hard to escape. The life of servitude. The life of being nothing more than a shadow in her father's mansion. But it wasn't my fault, Alexa whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to. I don't care what you wanted, Alexa, Hannah spat, cutting her off. You're going to keep quiet, or else. If you know what's good for you, you'll do exactly as I say. You're just a pawn in my game, and you'll do exactly as I say. You're just a pawn in my game, and you'll stay that way. You've already played your part, now don't ruin it by opening your mouth. Jen, Alexa's stepmother, stepped forward, her face a mixture of worry and guilt. She had always kept her distance, unsure of where she stood in the family dynamics. But her concern for Alexa was clear, even though she had never been one to intervene directly in the tension between Alexa and Hannah. Hannah, are you sure about this? Jen spoke softly, a note of hesitation in her voice. This isn't the way we should be handling things. Alexa is your sister. You can't keep treating her like this. But Hannah didn't listen to her stepmother's words. She was already moving toward the door, her eyes flicking back toward Alexa. I'm leaving to be with Alexander. I'm going back to my rightful place. But mark my words, Alexa. If you so much as think about telling him the truth, I'll make sure you regret it. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. With that, Hannah turned on her heels and walked out of the room, leaving Alexa standing in the middle of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Jen lingered for a moment, watching Alexa with a sad expression on her face, but she said nothing more before she too left. Alexa collapsed onto the bed, her body trembling with exhaustion, anxiety, and fear. Her hands were still shaking, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness filled her heart. What had she done? How had everything spiraled so far out of control? She had thought the night was the end, that once she returned home, everything would go back to normal. But now, it seemed like the consequences were just beginning to unfold. And the worst part was that she didn't know if she would be able to keep the truth hidden forever.